federal government has questioned the Victorian government's confidence in its contact tracing abilities. This is after Premier Andrews announced it would pause the further easing of restrictions yesterday. Let's go live now to Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Tim, thanks so much for your time. First of all, there seems to be a couple of problems with this contact tracing. Still, shouldn't this have been sorted out?
Well, the state government has now had 8 months to sort out their contact tracing and their systems processes to build confidence with Victorians that we can find some sort of COVID normal. Instead of actually getting action, what we've seen is them throwing northern suburbs family under the bus and blaming them when in fact it's been problems with their own systems. And this frankly is despicable and disgraceful behaviour by the state government, attacking Victorians rather than building up the confidence of the system that we desperately need.
Melbourne has been very patient. They're still compliant.
Well, I think it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to, when Dan Andrews has broken the contract he had with the people of Victoria. They set out a clear pathway of reducing the caseload numbers day by day, the average rolling numbers. They've been met, even though most people conceded it would be very difficult. Victorians have been very compliant and done their duty. And Dan Andrews yesterday basically broke that contract with Victorians and said, even though you've met the benchmarks, even though you've done the right thing, we're going to continue to maintain existing measures.
Well, business is really frustrated. Do you accept that some Victorians just love Daniel Andrews and he can do no wrong?
Well, I think some people, frankly, don't really appreciate the degree and the scale of what's going on and the consequences that are happening, particularly economically. Of course, the federal government is doing a lot to support Victorians, Victorian households and Victorian businesses at this critical time in the budget delivered by Josh Frydenberg. But the reality is the damage that's being done on a health basis, and not just in terms of COVID-19, but we have to look at the full spectrum, mental health measures, which again the federal government is also helping and supporting with, as well as of course economic measures, mean that a lot of the problems are being masked.
Chris Lucas, for one, he was almost desperate when he was speaking to us. Oh, I would say he was desperate just a little earlier on this morning. He, for one, says Daniel Andrews should stand down because business no longer have faith in his decision-making. Is that a course of action that you would back up?
Well, I think when we've got a problem as we have now, where you've basically got a runaway freight train, the main thing to do is to get it to stop, not to actually think the solution is to change a driver at this point. But it's very hard to see how Victorian businesses, Victorian households, Victorians themselves can have any confidence in rebuilding the state when we have a state premier who basically signs contracts with the people and breaks those contracts at his preferment and without any consultation or discussion or frankly any regard of the impact it's having on people, Victorians and their lives.
What do you make of Jenny Mikakos's latest contributions via Twitter?
Well, I welcome the fact that Jenny reminds some people in the Labor Party that you are allowed to have differences of opinion. And there are plenty of federal Labor colleagues as well as state Labor colleagues who acknowledge the shortcomings of the Andrews government's approach. And they might say it privately. Perhaps some of them need to start to at least say it within their party room and directly to the Premier himself so that we can get some proportionality, reason and judgment and have some honouring of the contract that the state government had with the people of Victoria.
Yeah, it seems to be moving away from this parliamentary system of democracy, doesn't it? There seems to be a very small and a smaller circle within Victoria making all the decisions.
Well, basically, they've centralised power to a gang of a small number of ministers. Parliament has barely sat. There's been virtually no oversight of the measures. And, of course, in the Victorian Upper House, there is technically a COVID committee reviewing the measures implemented by the state government. It's chaired by the Labor Party, dominated by the Labor Party. And this is not the sort of approach that you can have if you want to build public confidence. At federal level, we have a Senate committee looking at COVID-19 measures. It was chaired by the Labor Party. It has a multitude of members from different parties. That's a sustainable way to build public confidence.
And just quickly, Christine Holgate felt the wrath of the Prime Minister last week for the purchase of watches. Is James Shipton in the same category?
Well, he at least had the good judgment to step aside temporarily while there's a review being conducted into the matter around why both the Deputy Commissioner claimed accommodation expenses they weren't entitled to, and he claimed tax advice and support that it seems he wasn't entitled to. So I think that's a good step, but ultimately it's going to be one where we're going to have to wait to see what the review says. And then, of course, it sits across the backdrop about whether further reform of ASIC is justified.
Well, Tim Wilson, just on our screen, we have some breaking news. No new COVID cases or deaths in Victoria have been recorded in the last 24 hours. So that is some good news. Perhaps that might sway the thinking of the Premier this morning. What do you think?
Well, I hope so, at least because by deliberately blaming a northern suburbs family for an outbreak where they were given the clear by the Department of Health and Human Services and thrown them under the bus, should really prompt the Premier to pause and rethink where his priorities are and to focus on what we need to do to get sustainably out of this lockdown, because Victorians have been doing it tough. This has a huge impact socially, on a health basis and economically, and we need a sustainable way forward.